This week, we welcome Matt Ashburn, National Security Engagement Lead at Authenticate, to discuss how to scale your SOC, protecting against browser-based threats. In the Leadership and Communications section, cybersecurity, a risk to all board of directors. Is the cybersecurity industry selling lemons? Apparently, lots of important CISOs think it is. 4 critical strategies for tech leaders in Gartner's CIO agenda, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. As a security leader, Cybra for Teams was built to make your job easier. Are you struggling to measure your team's skills proficiency, provide critical or relevant role-based training, or translate training investments into meaningful business outcomes? Cybra for Teams is the industry's #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on Cybra. Cybra for Teams. Skills development solved. Visit cybra.it/solved to solve your training problems. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Arduous legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter and compete in today's business climate. CyberSaint ingests data from your existing tech stack to deliver unprecedented, patented automation and visibility into enterprise risk and compliance. Don't get left behind. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs and business leaders of Fortune 500 and more partner with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaintBSW.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 193, recorded October 26, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in a very snowy Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island are my co-hosts, Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Coming from the dark days in New England.
Yes. We don't need to talk about that. It's good to be here, Matt.
He who shall not be named.
Yes. I'm just happy the Big Ten is playing football again, because watching professional football is painful right now.
It is.
For once we can feel it with you, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Welcome to my world. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on our YouTube channel. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to view the agenda and register for free. Also, learn how to build an integrated security program in our webcast on October 28th. On November 5th, we'll show you how to build proper metrics and KPIs, and learn why you should stop trying to discover and classify data in our webcast on November 12th. We also just added another one for November 19th. So if you want to see all of our webcasts, visit securityweekly.com/webcasts, or you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand to see all of our previously recorded webcasts. This segment is sponsored by Authenticate. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/authenticate. Matt Ashburn is National Security Engagement Lead at Authenticate, focusing on engagement with national security customers. Prior to Authenticate, Matt served as a CIA officer focusing on cyber issues, including a detailed serving on the National Security Council as the Chief Information Security Officer and Special Advisor to the National Security Advisor, leading technical expertise, risk reduction strategies, and policy for national security systems. Matt, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Matt, great to be here again. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. You have a lot of great experience in our national security side. we're going to talk about the SOC today. We're going to talk about scaling the SOC and SOC resources. But before we get into some of the, deep dive into how Authenticate helps, let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges with SOC and SOC analysts.
Yeah, Matt, that's a good question, right? So, I mean, most of my career was spent in the federal government and also some in the commercial financial sector, standing up SOCs, right? So standing up those cyber defense teams or working as an incident responder myself, either as a level 1, level 2, level 3 analyst or cyber threat intel team, right? And this is something that's familiar to many people. And it's where the heart of cyber defense happens, right? The incidents begin and end there in the SOC, and they typically have wide-ranging responsibilities, limited resources, and constraints that every team has to work through, right? So you have to prioritize where you spend your security investment, where you spend your time. And one of the other things that SOCs face, unfortunately, is high turnover, right? There's a high rate of attrition. People get really bogged down in the game of whack-a-mole that they have to play. And it's really, really frustrating. So SOCs really need two things that I found in my career, right? One is to prioritize your time best, right? And gain some efficiency somehow. And, despite all the security investment that people have spent over the past 15 years, somehow SOCs still spend 90% or more of their time on these email-based attacks or web-based attacks where maybe it's a drive-by download or ransomware or maybe an email with a phishing link or an attachment that's malicious. And that leads to a compromise of the network, right? And cyber defenders spend probably 95% of their time on these types of incidents, regardless of the security spend that we've invested in over the past 15 years. And it's super frustrating. The other thing that they spend a lot of time doing is once they have an incident, they now have to go research it and triage whatever the suspected malicious content is very rapidly. So in the case of an email-based attack, for example, or ransomware, something has made it into the corporate environment. And now they have to somehow analyze that and make a call, yes or no, whether or not an incident exists and how to respond to that. So those are two areas where they really need to gain some efficiency. And we have some ways we can help them with that.
Now, I think a lot of people, when they think about efficiency and scale, they think security, orchestration, and automation solutions, right? Because that's like the first thing you do, right? Is you go buy a SOAR platform and you get scale.
Absolutely, right. And those are all great things to have, right? You need to have good, strong processes. You need to have automation where it makes sense. And that's sort of where we come in, right? We're a service that actually, I think, fits in very well to the SOC mission. So we offer essentially a web browser as a service. So rather than have the web browser inside of your corporate network and have it reach out to the internet, grab untrusted content and bring it back down to the workstation, which, by the way, that's where your sensitive data resides, right? You want to keep that untrusted content away from your sensitive data, away from your users, away from your applications that you care about. So what we do is we actually have the web browser outside of the corporate network in a cloud-based container. And this allows you to have full access, be able to view and interact with web content just like you would with any other web browser, but it's completely isolated from the things that you care about. So it gives you the full access, but prevents things like drive-by downloads, ransomware, malicious links and attachments from calling back out to the internet. So it really provides a really big time gain, and you gain back your time there in the SOC, right? So rather than spending 90% of your time on these types of incidents, you now have 90% of your time back.
Yeah. You're creating that efficiency at the root cause of the problem, right? Instead of putting a big platform in to try to analyze all the data coming in, you're hitting it at the root cause.
That's exactly right. And the web browsing architecture, right, is like 30 years old. Tim Berners-Lee created the web browsing standards and architecture 30 years ago, and it really hasn't evolved. It doesn't have built-in security into the protocols, and you really can't reverse back and try to add those in now, because what you get is a bunch of sensors there in your security stack that are always trying to scan and detect malware. And we know that those things are never going to be 100%, right? You're always going to have some way to get around those, some way to evade detection, or there's a new exploit that's out there that we don't know about. Rather, what we do is we address the root cause, which is that the web browser is inside the network typically and grabs untrusted content and brings it in. We eliminate that completely with a true zero trust architecture. And we really thought the problem from the ground up. We said, if we were to design a web browser today, what would it look like, right? First of all, it'd be zero trust. We don't bring any content into your corporate infrastructure or your organization's infrastructure. We leave all the untrusted content outside, but we still give the user full access to view and interact with everything that they need to interact with, right? We also built in a bunch of enterprise security options like data loss prevention or super detailed auditing and logging. Those are all things that can also benefit the SOC.
Yeah, so you created an abstraction layer between the end user and the content that they're actually viewing, right? So that's a beautiful thing.
That's right. And the other thing is also the SOC itself can use a cloud browser, right? So once you have a malicious piece of content and you want to go investigate it further, well, why do that on your corporate network, right? Most SOCs have a standalone dirty network that requires an intense amount of overhead and operations and maintenance cost. It's also another security risk, right? Because now you're transferring data back and forth from this untrusted network to your organization's constituent network, and that can bring its own risks into play. And I've seen a couple of cases in my time where a SOC analyst that is very well intentioned somehow infects his own workstation on the corporate network, right? And that's always a bad day and a bit of an embarrassment if you're a SOC analyst. So we can actually be used both to prevent these incidents as well as within the SOC itself to go investigate untrusted content and view it, interact with it, and analyze it in a way that doesn't affect the corporate network security.
Matt, I won't argue with your point that the web browser certainly is the primary vehicle for pulling down, content, and a lot of times malicious content. And the browser architecture in and of itself has a lot of moving parts. We've seen a lot of vulnerabilities in, it's fascinating to look into Chrome, for example, and how they break up the rendering engine versus the browser engine in each tab and the vulnerabilities and how each browser has implemented the JavaScript engine as an example, right? But the browser is but one software application that uses HTTP or HTTPS to communicate from between the endpoint and the internet. What is available for your users to apply policy as to how they browse the web, right? Like, is this specific to the user has the intent of using a web browser and going out, or are there other ways that you can provide to, like, if you've ever fired up a sniffer on your network, it's not just your browser talking over HTTP protocols.
That's absolutely right. And that's something that we see a lot of challenges with in many organizations. By and large, most of the attacks, most of the compromises come from the user-initiated traffic, by and large.
Yeah, agreed.
And unfortunately, because of all this, we'll call it noise, this just general internet badness that's out there, the SOCs are overloaded with this stuff. They spend most of the time on that. And so, my opinion is let's offload that to a cloud-based service where it makes sense, where you don't have to worry about the content the user is seeing. And, then you can deal with the rest of it, right? There are other strategies that you can use to deal with that other 10% of incidents. And the other thing, the other benefit that you get that I really like is that you reduce that SOC turnover, because now your super smart analysts are not getting bogged down with the really boring, tedious work of web-based malware. They now can go focus on the more complex things. Perhaps there's a DNS covert channel beaconing out that you don't see. Perhaps there's a supply chain attack that's been successful. These are things that unfortunately SOCs don't have a lot of time to spend to go research and investigate.
So on the user side, you just have to control what their default browser is in the operating system? Is that how it's enforced as a policy?
That's exactly right. There's two ways to do it, really. There's one is you can install it as you would any other executable as a web browser, right? Mm-hmm. So just like Chrome or Firefox or Edge, install our browser alongside it, and the user can go use that. The other way that you can use our service is if you have an existing secure web gateway, which most organizations do, and perhaps you have a policy that's running there to filter out certain content that may be objectionable or against your corporate policy. We can have a seamless integration with many of those where you can set up a page that will redirect into our service seamlessly and unbeknownst to the user, and will actually be a web-based application that would be launched in tab there with the user.
Gotcha.
Awesome. So when I think about scale for a second in the SOC, right? The first thing we just did, I think, is we took 90% of the traditional web-based threats, and we kind of threw them away, right? By using Silo. Now, if I'm in the SOC, where else do I get some economies of scale, some efficiencies with Silo for research, right? Where I see other malicious activity. Talk about, you started to go down that path a little bit. How else does Silo and having this browser capability, this isolation capability available to the SOC analysts, how does that also help them scale?
Right. Great question. So I'll switch to a video here and you can see this. So this is actually a demo video that we created here. And this is a user actually using our browser. It looks and feels just like any other browser. And, perhaps they're looking for dinner recommendations or they're browsing a news website. And you see here, it's not an interface that requires a lot of training or anything like that. It's super easy to use and very intuitive because it's built on today's browsers, right? And perhaps somebody goes to their email client like they're doing here, and they see, oh, this is a very attractive email. Maybe I want to click this. They then open the email. They open up the link, and then of course we know what happens from there, right? The link is accessing some kind of malicious content, and then it's prompting them to download it. In this case, the user is actually clicking save, but it's actually not being saved to the local workstation. It's being saved to a very safe and secure cloud-based storage that's within the browser itself. That's something that we offer with our product. Now, what just happened there happened just a few seconds, but could have meant a really bad day for the SOC, right? If it had been an actual compromise. And so on the other side of things, which you mentioned there, Matt, is that it can be used for the SOC's benefit as well. So from the SOC's perspective, we can actually play this video here where we're actually from the SOC's perspective, right? We're here in Splunk, and we actually have a Splunk app that is fully integrated with our log data here. So the great thing about Silo that I really love is that you get super detailed audit logs. And so actually we have a full audit log here of the session that was just introduced. And we see everything from the user logging in, the fact that they logged in using a PIN, the type of session that they have going on here, and all this very, very detailed information. And we can actually use this for many things. There's the insider threat piece where you're actually monitoring users for misuse or abuse of policies, or perhaps data theft, that type of thing. But you can also use it for just the regular SOC use case for cyber defense and viewing exactly line by line what the user is doing in a unified audit trail across the whole browser session. And in this case, we see that they visited a news site, CNN. We see them going and looking at their email here and checking the email. We see them actually performing an action there within the email webpage there. And then we see a bucket that was created. This is an indication that perhaps they were going to download a file. We see here the download image, or the download action rather. And it's very, very detailed here. We even have the URL that they used to go access, right? And so if we now take that, we can actually get all this information and now use it to the benefit of the defense, right? So we can grab the URL here and actually upload it to our favorite sandbox, whether it's VirusTotal, maybe just do a quick triage, or perhaps something else like Joe's Sandbox or something else, or maybe we have an own in-house sandbox that we'd like to do. So without any worry at all, just put the URL in here, visit it, and you would never do this on your corporate network, right? You would never go visit a malicious URL on your corporate network. But in this case, we did so, and there's no risk at all because it's actually taking place outside in the cloud, and we're just viewing the session remotely. And I'm actually saving a copy of the file there to our cloud-based storage. And now I'm in our storage manager here, and I'm just going to locate the file that we downloaded. There it is. Right-click. I'm going to send it to VirusTotal for a quick scan. And we get a notification here that the report has been generated and it's been saved to our storage. Great, there we go. And so now I'm going to go find the report. And this is super easy to do. And there's no transfer of data back and forth between the corporate network and a dirty network that I have to maintain. It's all right here. And I can copy and paste, and I'll grab this VirusTotal report that was generated, and I can see it in a matter of seconds, right? So in 60 seconds or so here, I've done a complete triage here, and I can determine whether or not something malicious has happened. And we see here that it's actually an emotet variant that would have caused a compromise on our corporate network. And so this is something where I see we can get a lot of efficiency back in the SOC, right? Where we have the need here to rapidly triage files and do research. And we could do more research, right? If we had more time, right? We could go research domains or URLs, or if there are certain email addresses or IP addresses, we can go research all of those, all without any attribution to our organization, which is something else that's really important for those cyber threat intel teams.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting, right, is all the log data sitting there integrated into Splunk. So now Splunk can actually do aspects of the alerting for you, right? It's consuming all the logs from Authenticate. It's the one that triggers the alert. And then the analyst now can go to Silo for research to do the research without potentially infecting their own environment, because now they have access out of their environment to go do all this browser-based research in an isolated environment. They don't even have to build their own isolation network.
That's exactly right. This is a total replacement for your standard dirty networks that a lot of organizations have to maintain. And those always come with their own pain points, right? And their own downsides. With this, you have an all-in-one solution here where you can remotely access these URLs, whether they're malicious or not, and have no fear that it's going to infiltrate and compromise your own network.
Matt, can you also separate those networks from ones that you're monitoring and doing correlation with? In other words, when I go to the sites after I've gotten a malware sample and I'm in the SOC, I don't want that necessarily to be like logged and correlated to other things, which is a precursor to my next question, right? But you can separate those, I'm assuming, into like different buckets, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely. There are many ways you could do that. I would probably do that in Splunk itself, right? You can categorize. There's a ton of information, as you saw there, right? So we could have perhaps our SOC users within a group. Maybe the type of session that was launched can be maybe the managed attribution session that we know is for the SOC, that type of thing. There are many ways you can separate out those logs so that they're not miscorrelated, let's say.
Gotcha. So separate them on the log side. Can you separate that on the silo side as well and create like different groups and like don't log all the stuff here because it's, for research?
Right. So that's a great question. You actually can. We have a fully functional access control interface, really slick admin interface, and you can have many different organization types, sub-orgs and sub-orgs and all these things you want to do. So you could easily do that. Yes.
That's awesome. Speaking of the correlation, what are some effective means in which organizations are using this data to correlate it, right? Because we've just done segments on Sysmon and collecting AD authentication logs, and I'm really buying into this theory of what comes out of the OS natively is really what you need to do effective EDR. How are customers correlating that with the silo logs?
Right. That's an excellent question, right? So one of the points that you brought up earlier, right, is that it's not only the user that can initiate connections out to the web. This is something that really provides you assurance that the user is actually interacting with this session. Because let's say you have silo and then you've done a really good job of locking down your network, and only authorized and authenticated devices and services can call out to the internet directly. And maybe all of your other web traffic goes through silo, right? And if that's the case, perhaps Sysmon or Procmon or something else there in the operating system, which provides you a great deal of detail, perhaps that shows you that something is initiating a web connection. That can actually help you, pairing that with the silo data, help you deconflict a bit there and understand what is actually legitimate user activity versus something else that may be automated or something else lurking there in the background.
Yeah, I was just thinking of those exact, like I would have a rule in Sysmon that would be like, if Firefox.exe attempts to go out to the internet, well, there's no need for a user to ever do that. So in Sysmon, you can say, show me when that happens, because it logs the process and where it connected to and the port and all that stuff.
That's exactly right. And we didn't show it in this video, but we actually have an interactive login option where you actually have to punch in a PIN, a 4-digit PIN that corresponds to letters that are on the screen. And that actually is to prevent keylogging. So if you have a keylogger, for example, and you have just basic password and PIN or something like that, or some kind of authentication, the keylogger can easily grab your password or grab your PIN. What we do is that we actually scramble the letters around every time you log in. And so this time, perhaps the number 1 is associated with M, and maybe the number 2 is associated with Z. You have to type in a certain sequence there that changes every time to prevent keylogging. This is another assurance that the activity is 100% user initiated and more legitimate than something that's automated.
So it sounds like you're generating a cipher on the fly for the user to log in.
Yes.
That's all, like the things we used to get in breakfast cereal and used by the military. We've done segments on that. Yeah, that's awesome.
Jason, I'm curious, you've got a bunch of browser-based users, where do you see some of the value here for your team?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I see it twofold, right? I mean, this is definitely something I want to get with my team on. That abstraction layer for me is key, right? I mean, I have 1,200 folks out there in the field, even worse now that we're almost 90% remote workforce, that takes them outside of our walls. And for me, I see the value even more over the last 6 months to be able to have that abstraction layer between my user and the content that they're going out there to pull down, right? I mean, there's so many instances, God, I could tell story after story, about our end users and them raising the hand after the fact. Well, guess what? I don't want that hand raised after the fact. I want that preventative measure. I don't ever want it to get to our analysts, right? So from that perspective, tons and tons of value. I definitely want to drive deeper into the silo for research, right? That's somewhere where I think my team could get a ton of value out of. Going to your website, I saw the value add in OSINT collection, threat intel, right? Criminal investigations. More and more, we're doing e-discovery for customers, right? Because we're a managed service provider and we're a IT professional services organization. But when the stuff hits the fan, who's the first person they call? Is their NOC, right? They call their NOC and they're saying we need help with e-discovery. So I see value on the e-discovery side. I don't know if you have use cases for that, but that's something that popped out right away for me.
Yeah, Jason, you're thinking exactly right there. There are many different use cases for the technology, and you mentioned remote work. We actually have several very large customers, in fact, using our solution for remote work to enable that managed attribution, right? Mm-hmm. So perhaps they're doing open source research or criminal investigations, and normally they'd have to drive into an office and log into a separate isolated network there that is maybe a misattrib network that's on site. We provide that as a service, right? Mm-hmm. So you can access it from anywhere in the world, which really does help enable that remote work. And so we talk about scaling our SOC and enabling remote work for the SOC a lot, and that's a big challenge too. Many times the SOC has to be on site, and that can be a decrease there to morale, and can be yet another hardship for the SOC analyst, right?
Yeah.
By enabling them to remote work, because now they can do this sandboxing and malware analysis and initial triage anywhere that they are, you no longer have a case there where they're prevented from using remote work solutions.
100%. I mean, from our perspective, and again, we don't run a SOC, we run a NOC for our customers. We have the SOC for internal, but for our customer facing, we made a decision early on that we can't have our NOC engineers physically in one location, because guess what? One person gets sick, our entire NOC is down, and we can't afford to have that happen. Same thing for a SOC, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you can't afford to have that happen where one person gets exposed and now you've literally hit your entire SOC and had to have them quarantined. So from our perspective, I mean, this is a huge benefit that now you can have that level of confidence and trust that a remote NOC or remote SOC can be successful.
That's absolutely right. And we actually have some use cases where some corporate customers of ours, they have a need to have web apps that are remotely accessible, right? But they're concerned about the security, and they don't want to open it up to everyone because they are concerned about perhaps some vulnerabilities or attempted exploits or any of those things, right? You can actually use our technology, but in a slightly different way, where you have a virtualized instance of a browser front-ending a web-based application that can replace a web application firewall, for example, or work in coordination with a WAF, right? Where now you have a secure access gateway to your web apps that are normally public-facing, but with some extra security built in, because the end users are not directly interacting with the server hosting the application. They're interacting with our service, and our service is interacting with the web application.
No, that's great.
Yeah. Again, that layer of abstraction, right, that allows you to do that.
Yeah, but also having that, that level of ability, because just from what you showed in the demo, the logs. I mean, it's all about having that content in a place where you can bring it back and have that chain of custody and show it in an instance where it's either an investigation or, like I mentioned earlier, e-discovery. To be able to have it there where you can prove the chain of custody if you needed to, it's huge for me. Like I said, we have so many customers looking for e-discovery, and the first thing the attorneys do is say, all right, what was the chain of custody? Show me everybody who touched this, everybody who clicked something. And to be able to have that level of logging is huge.
Right. And, I talked a little bit about the architecture of a web browser. It was not built with security in mind. And so your web browsers today don't have built-in auditing and logging, and you typically have to rely on third-party, either an endpoint solution of some kind, endpoint security solution, or maybe the logs that are within the operating system itself. And that can get kind of messy when you start looking at that. So we provide a very, very in-depth log record across all sessions within the web browser. That's a unified audit record that can be easily digested by Splunk or whatever your solution is, right? So it was built with security in mind.
That's awesome.
That's awesome, because you think about what our web browsers do today. They're often the culprits of eating as much CPU and RAM, more so than other applications on our desktop. So the fact that we don't have visibility, as you said, Matt, into is kind of frightening, right? They're the primary interface for us to use our applications, whatever that application is, and there's zero visibility into them. And which is
hey, by the way, that's how we get to all of our major line of business applications that run the business. Your ERP systems, right? Your CRM. I mean, you're running the business out of a browser these days.
Pretty much. And what you do is you just throw more CPU and RAM at it because, the more tabs you have open, the slower your machine gets.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, gentlemen, any additional questions for Matt while we have him?
No, I think we're good.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I just ran a speed test, just so you know, and it was over a gig of speed that I got back. So we're talking about performance. A virtual browser is a way to do that without sacrificing.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
I saw that. I was wondering what you're doing.
Yes. I love that.
Nice.
All right, guys, take care. Great to see you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. To learn more about Silo or Silo for research, please visit securityweekly.com/authenticate. We'll take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.